This is a question I get asked a lot, and honestly, one I've wondered about myself for a long time. Freemartinism is something every cattle producer knows about, a female born twin to a male that ends up sterile. But you almost never hear about it in goats. Today, I want to get to the bottom of why that is, because the answer isn't that goats are immune to it, it comes down to anatomy, and it's actually pretty interesting once you understand what's happening. Let's get to it. Hey there, welcome to GoatWise. I'm Millie Bradshaw, animal scientist and rancher. Here, we talk meat goats, feeding strategies, goat fencing, and livestock management that holds up in real life. If you care about raising goats well and building systems that actually work, you're in the right place. Let's talk livestock. If this podcast has been helpful, would you leave a review on Apple Podcasts? Scroll down to ratings and reviews, tap the stars, and leave a few sentences. It helps more serious livestock producers find the show, and I read every one of them. Then go grab the free kidding due date chart at goatwise.com/kidding-chart. That also gets you on the insider email list. The link is in the show notes. Here's what's happening on the ranch. We are almost finished with kidding. As of Saturday, we had 77 does that had kidded, 148 live kids on the ground, and only 3 does left that could still kid. We've never had a year where we didn't have at least a couple open does, so honestly, we could already be done. I just need to get eyes on those last few and figure out exactly where things stand. The first 21-day heat officially ended Sunday, but I like to give it 24 days because some does run a little longer cycle than that. Anything born after that window would be considered a second heat kid. Right now, the records are looking really impressive, and I'm excited to put together the annual kidding report soon. On the home front, the bottle kid pen got a little overwhelming, so we made some changes. Darcy is responsible for the bottle kids, and bottle feeding 13 of them individually was taking her a full hour. So Stacy built her a bottle feeding rack, and we're experimenting with how to handle a group of kids that vary pretty widely in size. So far, it's working well, and feeding is no longer an hour-long chore 3 times per day. I expect within a week or two, we'll switch them over to cold milk, which will simplify things even more. And if you're interested, those bottle kids are for sale. If you want a couple, or a lot of them, reach out. Buying bottle kids is actually one of the ways we grew our show goat herd years ago. It was an affordable way to get the genetics we wanted with a little extra work on the front end. All right, let's talk about Freemartins. This is a question I get from listeners pretty regularly, and I'll be honest, it's something I've wondered about myself for a long time without ever sitting down and really digging into it. So I finally did, and I want to walk you through what I found. First, let's define what we're even talking about. A Freemartin is a female born as a twin to a male who ends up sterile or partially sterile. But a female doesn't become a Freemartin just because she happened to have a male twin. The actual problem is something much more specific: early blood exchange between the twins while she's still developing in the womb. If that blood connection never forms, she can stay completely fertile, even though she was born as a mixed-sex twin. Having a brother in there with her isn't the problem by itself. It's whether their blood supplies got connected. So let's talk about why that connection forms in cattle, because this is well understood and it's where most of our knowledge about Freemartins comes from. In cattle, twin pregnancies very commonly result in the 2 placentas fusing together with shared blood vessels between them. That's called vascular anastomosis. Basically, plumbing that connects the 2 fetuses' blood supplies. When that connection forms early enough in the pregnancy, male hormones and even actual cells from the male twin can cross over into the female twin during a critical window, the window when her reproductive tract is still being built. Here's how that plays out biologically. In a normal female fetus, there are structures called the Mullerian ducts, and those develop into the uterus, the oviducts, and the good portion of the rest of the reproductive tract. If male-derived hormones, including one specifically called anti-Mullerian hormone, reach her early enough, those developing structures get suppressed or just don't finish forming properly. So this isn't simply male hormones make a female more masculine. It's an early disruption of the entire female reproductive pathway before that pathway is even fully established. And because it happens so early in development, the effect is permanent. There's no catching up later. In cattle, the numbers on this are striking. About 90% of female mixed-sex twins are affected enough to become Freemartins. Roughly 10% don't form that critical placental fusion and stay fertile. So, having a male twin raises your risk enormously in cattle, but it's not an automatic guarantee. It comes down to whether that blood connection actually formed, how early it formed, and how much male signal got through before her reproductive tract was finished developing. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because this is the part that actually answers the question. Why don't we see this in goats the way we see it in cattle? To understand that, you need to know a little bit about how ruminant placentas are built in general, because goats and cattle are actually pretty similar here. The placenta in ruminants isn't one big flat structure like you might picture. It's made up of many separate attachment units called placentomes. That's where the fetal side, called the cotyledon, meets the maternal side, called the caruncle. That's the exchange site for nutrients, oxygen, and waste between mom and the developing kid or calf. Each kid or calf has its own set of fetal membranes, and those membranes form their own network of placentomes. Normally, and this is true in both species, those placentomes aren't a shared blood pipe between siblings. Each fetus keeps its own separate circulation. In cattle, the Freemartin problem isn't that the placentomes themselves merge between twins, it's that separate vascular connections can develop between the two twins' placentas, off to the side of the normal placentome structure, and that's what lets blood cross over. Goats have basically that same placentome-based setup in general terms, but here's the key difference. In goats, the fetal blood circulation of twins usually stay separate. The plumbing just doesn't connect the same way it tends to in cattle. So the male twin's hormones generally never reach the female twin through shared blood because that shared blood connection typically isn't there to begin with. Here's what that means. It's not that goats are biologically immune to this process. It's not that their placenta is somehow blocking hormones in some special protective way. It's that the specific vascular connection that causes the problem in cattle just doesn't form as often in goats. The placenta protects goats indirectly, just by making it less likely that the female fetus ever gets exposed to enough of the male twin signal through shared circulation in the first place. So, what are the actual numbers? In goats, Freemartinism is generally under 1%. That's a massive difference from the 90% figure we see in cattle mixed-sex twins. But that risk goes up as litter size increases, especially when there are more than 3 kids. With quadruplets or higher, there's more opportunity for unusual fetal interactions, just because you've got more fetuses packed into the uterus and more chances for that vascular connection to form somewhere it normally wouldn't. I went looking for a clean, solid number on the risk as litter size increases, and that data just isn't well standardized for goats the way the cattle numbers are. What I can tell you with confidence is the general pattern. Risk is low in twins, still low but somewhat higher in triplets just because there are more fetuses involved, and it becomes more noticeable in quadruplets or larger. So, if you've got female kids born in a mixed set of quads, it's reasonable to pay closer attention. But it's not automatic that they're Freemartins. It just means the odds shifted a little. In all of our years of raising goats, I've never seen a Freemartin, not even in quintuplets when we've had those. So, based on that, I'd say the risk is very low. If you suspect a doeling might be a Freemartin, how do you actually find out? There are 3 practical ways. A physical exam can sometimes show a small or abnormal vulva or other physical signs that the reproductive tract didn't develop normally. That's the cheapest method, but it's not always conclusive. Some Freemartins look completely normal externally. Breeding history is the obvious way, failure to cycle or failure to conceive when you breed her, but that's a slow, inefficient way to find out because you're waiting all the way until breeding age to get your answer, and by then you've invested a year or more of feed and management into an animal that was never going to be a producing doe. And by that time, you may forget about her birth stats and not even consider Freemartinism as a possibility for her lack of fertility. The most reliable method, especially if you want to know early, is a DNA test that checks for Y chromosome material. That can detect the condition well before breeding age. If you've got a doeling from a mixed-sex litter that's giving you any reason for concern, the cleanest move is to test her early rather than wait and find out the hard way after you've already raised her as a replacement. I'll tell you honestly, I have never worried about Freemartins in our herd. It just wasn't something on my radar. But after digging into this and learning that the risk climbs with larger sets of multiples, I'm going to start paying more attention to the doe kids coming out of our quadruplet births going forward. We've had 2 sets of quads this season. Both are mixed sex, so this isn't just an academic exercise for me. It's actually relevant to my own herd right now this year. So the short answer to the question I get asked all the time: yes, goats absolutely can have Freemartins, but it's rare, generally under 1%, compared to roughly 90% in cattle mixed-sex twins. The difference comes down to placental anatomy, not some special immunity goats have. It's good to know, especially if you're seeing larger litters and seeing more quads come through your herd, but it's not something most goat producers need to lose sleep over. If you have questions, send me an email, millie@drycreekpastures.com. See you next week. Hey there, thanks for listening today. If this episode was helpful, share it with another producer who's raising goats. And if you haven't already, leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more serious livestock owners find the show. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for veterinary advice. I'll see you next week here on GoatWise.